The phone screen lit up my bedroom at 3:17 a.m., cutting through the darkness like a blade. One word from Rachel. Just run. My daughter doesn't text during a shift unless it's life or death. She's worked homicide for the Ottawa Police Service for 7 years, and I can count on one hand the times she's broken protocol to contact me. My fingers were shaking as I called her back, but it went straight to voicemail. The silence on the other end felt like falling. I sat there in the darkness, the phone heavy in my hand, listening to my own breathing. The house around me felt different suddenly, too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath along with me. The digital clock on David's side of the bed glowed 3:18 a.m. in harsh red numbers. His side. I still thought of it that way, even though he'd been gone for 4 months. Even though I'd stopped making the bed on both sides and had started sleeping diagonally, trying to fill the emptiness with my own body. I was still sitting there in my nightgown, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest when the second message arrived. Not from Rachel this time. A video file from an email address I didn't recognize. The sender was just a string of random numbers and letters, the kind of address that screams spam or scam or something worse. I almost deleted it. Should have deleted it. My thumb hovered over the trash icon for 3 full seconds while my rational mind screamed at me not to open strange emails at 3 a.m. from unknown senders. But the subject line said, "From David. Watch this now." My husband had been dead for 4 months. The video player opened. The image was slightly grainy, the lighting harsh. David sat in his office at home, the one in the basement he'd insisted on finishing himself 3 years ago. Behind him, I could see the bookshelf with his collection of military history, the maple desk we'd picked out together at that antique shop in Westboro. He looked thin. God, he looked so thin, and I didn't understand why I hadn't noticed. I pressed pause and stared at his frozen face on the screen. Really looked at it. The hollowness under his cheekbones. The way his shirt collar gaped slightly, like he'd lost weight in his neck. The shadows under his eyes that I'd attributed to working late, to stress, to the normal aging process of a man in his 50s. How had I missed it? How had I kissed that face every morning and not seen that he was dying? I hit play again, my hands trembling so badly the phone shook. His face had that hollowed quality, shadows under his cheekbones that made him look 10 years older. The timestamp in the corner said February the 2nd, 6 days before the stroke that killed him. "Sarah," he said, and his voice cracked my chest open all over again. Just my name, spoken in that particular way he had, a little rough around the edges. I could hear him breathing between words. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and someone has made a move against you." Rachel was instructed to send the warning if certain conditions were met. I need you to listen very carefully. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. The bedroom suddenly felt like a space I didn't recognize. Familiar furniture turned strange in the blue glow of the phone screen. The antique dresser we'd refinished together looked sinister in the shadows. The framed photos on the wall seemed to be watching me with accusatory eyes. All those smiling moments captured on film. All those years I'd spent oblivious to what was really happening. David explained that he'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 14 months earlier. 14 months. While I was planning our trip to Prince Edward Island for our 30th anniversary, measuring the hotel distance from Anne of Green Gables' house, he was dying. While I was complaining about his late nights at work, asking why he couldn't delegate more, he was preparing for this. The words came through the tiny speaker and didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. I rewound the video and listened again. Stage 4. Pancreatic. 14 months. The words were English. I understood their individual meanings, but strung together, they formed a sentence my brain refused to process. I'd kissed him every morning for 14 months. I'd done his laundry, finding receipts in his pockets, spare change, sometimes a grocery list in his handwriting. I'd noticed when he switched to decaf coffee and stopped eating spicy food, but I'd thought it was just age, just normal changes. I'd suggested he see a doctor about his digestion, and he'd said he would, and I'd believed him. How many lies had I swallowed? How many times had he looked me in the eye and told me everything was fine? "I couldn't tell you," he said, looking directly into the camera, and I saw his eyes were wet. David never cried. In 29 years of marriage, I'd seen him tear up exactly twice, once when Rachel was born, once when his mother died. They would have used it against us, used you to control me. I needed you to act normal, to be safe. They, he kept saying they. Who? I whispered to the empty bedroom. Who are they, David? As if he could hear me from beyond the grave, he continued. I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. But please, Sarah, please understand. This was the only way to keep you alive. My breath caught. Alive. Not safe. Alive. As in, someone wanted me dead. David had been a financial analyst for the Department of National Defense, reviewing procurement contracts. Boring work, he always said when people asked at parties. Numbers and paperwork, the kind of job that makes people's eyes glaze over. Except it wasn't boring at all. He'd discovered something 18 months ago, buried in a $47 million infrastructure contract. Money flowing to shell companies with addresses that didn't exist. Kickbacks that split 3 ways and then 6 ways and then 12. The kind of fraud that ruins careers and sends people to prison. I couldn't go to my supervisors, David said. His hands were folded on the desk, and I could see them shaking slightly. Some of them are involved. So I built a case, Sarah. Everything you need is in the Royal Bank safety deposit box under your maiden name, Box 1847. The key is behind our wedding photo, the one in the silver frame. He gave me detailed instructions, calm, methodical, the same tone he used when explaining how to reset the router or program the thermostat. As if he were teaching me to manage something ordinary instead of preparing me for war. Don't go to the police, not yet. Don't call anyone except the numbers in the emergency app. Don't stay at the house. Don't trust anyone who claims they're trying to help unless they know the code phrase. He leaned closer to the camera. The code phrase is, the roses need pruning. Anyone who's really from my network will say that within the first 2 minutes of meeting you. Anyone who doesn't, run. The video ended. I sat there for maybe 90 seconds, maybe 3 minutes. Time had stopped meaning anything. The phone screen went dark, and I was left staring at my own reflection in the black mirror, a 52-year-old woman in a nightgown, her hair unbrushed, her face pale and shocked. Then I heard the car door slam outside. It was 3:34 a.m. Nobody visits at 3:34 a.m. with good intentions. I stood up. My legs felt disconnected from my body, operating on some autopilot I didn't know I had. I grabbed my phone and did exactly what David had apparently prepared me to do without my knowledge. There was an app I'd never noticed before, tucked into a folder labeled Utilities that I'd never opened. Inside was a single app with a red icon. I opened it. It had one button. Emergency protocols initiated, it said after I pressed it, and the screen showed 14 contacts being notified simultaneously. I didn't know who any of them were. Then I went out the back door in my slippers and walked through Mrs. Kowalski's yard. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through the thin fabric. Her motion sensor light clicked on, flooding the space between our properties with harsh white illumination. I froze for a second, expecting her to come to the window, expecting someone to see me running through backyards in my nightgown at 3:35 in the morning like some kind of madwoman. But her house stayed dark. The whole street stayed dark except for the streetlights and that one motion sensor, now tracking my movements across her lawn. I kept walking, down the side alley where she kept her recycling bins. The bins smelled like stale beer and rotting vegetables, a smell that made my stomach turn. My slippers squelched in a puddle I couldn't see in the darkness. When I reached Bank Street, The Tim Hortons sign glowed in the pre-dawn darkness like a beacon of normalcy in a world that had just revealed itself to be something completely different. A man I'd never met was waiting in the parking lot in a silver Honda Civic. He stepped out when he saw me, and something about his posture told me he'd done this kind of thing before. Alert, but not aggressive. Ready, but not threatening. He was maybe 40, maybe younger, with dark hair and the kind of watchful eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "my name is James Ochoa. Your husband asked me to help if things went wrong." I stood there in the parking lot, the Tim Hortons sign buzzing above us, and waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5. "The roses need pruning," he said quietly. Something inside me that had been coiled tight since 3:17 a.m. released slightly. Not enough to breathe normally, not enough to feel safe, but enough to get in the car. I got in the car. Looking back now, I'm struck by how little I hesitated. But David's voice was still in my head, and Rachel had sent that message, and someone had been at my door at 3:34 a.m. You don't question the life raft when you're drowning. You just grab on. James drove toward Canada, taking side streets, checking his mirrors every few seconds. The streets of Ottawa at 3:45 a.m. were empty except for the occasional taxi and one police cruiser that made my heart jump into my throat. But James just maintained his speed, stayed calm, and the cruiser passed us without interest. He explained that David had hidden the cancer even from his doctor. Well, his regular doctor. Turns out he'd been seeing an oncologist in Gatineau, paying cash, using a different name. The medical records James showed me, pulled from a folder in the glove compartment, documented everything. The diagnosis in December 2 years ago. The decision to forego treatment that might buy him 6 painful months. The careful planning of how to protect me in the time he had left. "Why you?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hoarse. "Why did he choose you to help me?" James glanced at me, then back at the road. "I served with David in the reserves back in the 90s. We stayed in touch. When he found out he was dying, he reached out to a few people he trusted, people with particular skills. I do private security now, executive protection, the kind of work where you learn how to keep people safe from threats they don't see coming." "How many people did he recruit?" 7 of us on the core team, another dozen in supporting roles. Your husband was very thorough, Mrs. Patterson. He built redundancy into every system. If one of us failed, 3 others could step in. I looked out the window at the dark street sliding past. He built an army. He built a safety net. There's a difference. He knew the stroke was likely, James explained as we stopped at a red light, the only car at the intersection. The cancer had metastasized to his brain. He had maybe 3 months left anyway. He just needed to make sure everything was in place first. The words washed over me. I heard them. I understood the individual sentences, but the full meaning was too large to hold. My husband had chosen to die faster and alone so that I could live safely. He'd spent his last months documenting crimes instead of making peace with his mortality. He'd turned his death into a tactical decision. Did he suffer? I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. James was quiet for a moment. He was in pain, yes. But he managed it. He was focused. He said the work helped. Gave him a purpose beyond waiting to die. I could have been that purpose. I could have helped him. You were his purpose, Mrs. Patterson. Everything he did was for you. The work was just the method. We ended up at a hotel near the airport, the kind of place where nobody asks questions if you check in at 4 a.m. with no luggage. The lobby was bright and empty except for a tired-looking clerk who barely glanced at us. James paid cash and got me a key card to room 347. James left me with a key card and instructions to wait. Someone would come get me when it was safe. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the files James had transferred to my phone. Bank statements. David's real bank statements. Not the ones I'd seen. Accounts I didn't know existed. Money I didn't know we had. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Transfers, deposits, account balances that made no sense. We had $340, $1,000, I'd thought. That was the number I'd been working with. The amount I'd calculated would support me through retirement if I was careful. But these statements showed something completely different. The safety deposit box visit happened at 9 a.m., James accompanying me to the Royal Bank branch on Laurier. The key was exactly where David said it would be, tucked behind our wedding photo in the silver frame I'd carried from our bedroom. I'd looked at that photo 10,000 times, every day for 29 years, never once lifted it to see what was behind. The key was small and brass, with the number 1847 etched into it. Seeing it there, taped to the back of our wedding photo, seeing David's handwriting on the tape label that said for Sarah, made everything real in a way the video hadn't. This was physical evidence. This was preparation. This was my husband knowing he would die and planning for it with the same careful attention he'd brought to everything else in his life. The bank manager, a woman named Mrs. Chen who'd known David for years, looked at me with something like pity when I presented the key. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said. "David was a wonderful man." "Did you know about this box?" I asked. "He opened it about 18 months ago. I helped him with the paperwork. He seemed determined, focused. I remember thinking he was handling some important family documents." Family documents. Is that what we call evidence of corruption now? The box contained two 847 pages of documentation. I know the exact number because I counted them later. Bank transfers with routing numbers highlighted in yellow. Email exchanges printed on paper. The headers showing sent times and IP addresses. Photographs of meetings. Men in suits standing in parking garages and coffee shops, their faces circled in red marker. Audio recordings on USB drives, each one labeled with a date and location. David had spent 14 months building an airtight case against 12 people, including 2 deputy ministers and his own brother-in-law. His brother-in-law. Martin, who'd shown up at David's funeral and hugged me while saying, "Don't worry, Sarah. Family takes care of family. We'll make sure you're looked after." He'd smelled like expensive cologne and coffee. His grip had been firm, almost possessive. I'd thought he was being kind. What he actually meant was, "We'll make sure you don't become a problem." I sat in the bank's private viewing room, surrounded by 2 847 pages of my husband's secret war, and felt my understanding of reality crack and reform into something new. The life I thought I'd lived, safe, boring, predictable, had been an illusion, a carefully maintained performance. David had been fighting for our survival every day while I complained about ordinary things like grocery shopping and yard work. James took me to a secure location after we left the bank. Not a hotel this time. A house in Barhaven that belonged to someone in David's network. Someone who'd been paid in advance to provide exactly this kind of safe harbor. The house was ordinary from the outside. Beige siding, 2-car garage, landscaping that matched every other house on the street. Inside, it was something else. Security cameras, reinforced doors, a safe room in the basement that James showed me, just in case. There, I met the others. Patricia Chen was a lawyer specializing in fraud cases, 40-something with steel gray streaks in her black hair and a handshake that meant business. She'd been fully briefed by David 6 months before his death and paid a retainer that would cover whatever came next. "Your husband was one of the most meticulous clients I've ever had," she said as we sat around the dining room table. "He anticipated questions I didn't know to ask. He documented everything 3 times over. He built a legal case that's essentially bulletproof." "You knew he was dying?" "Yes, he told me up front. Said he needed someone who could continue the work after he was gone. I've handled a lot of difficult cases, Mrs. Patterson, but I've never had a client prepare for death this way. He loved you very much." Everyone kept saying that, as if love explained lying to me for 14 months. As if love justified keeping me in the dark while he fought battles I didn't know existed. Marcus Williams was a cybersecurity expert who looked younger than Rachel, all nervous energy and rapid-fire explanations about firewalls and encrypted communications. He'd locked down every digital aspect of my life without me knowing. My email, my bank accounts, my phone. Everything had been quietly reinforced, backdoors closed, vulnerabilities patched. "How long have you been monitoring me?" I asked. Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. 8 months. David wanted to make sure no one could track your digital footprint. No one could access your accounts or use your online presence to find you. I've been running security protocols this entire time. Watching me? Protecting you. There's a difference. The same thing James had said. Protection, not surveillance. As if the distinction mattered when I'd been watched without my knowledge for 8 months. Yolanda Reyes was a former RCMP officer, now working private security. She had the kind of eyes that missed nothing, the kind of stillness that made you believe she could wait forever if necessary. She'd been compiling additional evidence, following up on leads David couldn't chase himself. "I've been photographing Martin and his associates for 6 months," she said, spreading photos across the table. "Meetings, conversations, exchanges. Your husband identified the key players, and I've been documenting their movements. They're preparing for something. They accelerated their timeline after David died." And Rachel. My daughter had known for 2 months, brought in when David realized he was running out of time and needed someone in law enforcement he could trust absolutely. She stood when I came in, and I saw she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face blotchy. "Mom," she said, "I'm so sorry. He made me promise not to tell you until—" I held up my hand. I couldn't hear her apologize for keeping her father's secrets. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She'd done what David asked. That was what mattered. But later, when the others were reviewing documents in the dining room, Rachel found me in the kitchen making coffee I didn't want to drink. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the cup steady. "He was terrified," Rachel said quietly. "That's what you need to understand. Dad was absolutely terrified that if you knew, you'd be in danger. That someone would see the knowledge in your face. That you'd try to help and make yourself a target. So he lied to me. He protected you. Mom, I've seen the surveillance logs. Martin had people watching the house, watching you. If you'd changed your behavior at all, if you'd seemed scared or suspicious or even just different, they would have moved against you immediately. Dad needed you to be normal, to be safe. I wasn't safe. I was ignorant. You were alive. That's what he cared about." 7 people, all coordinated, all prepared, all waiting for Martin to make his move. The financial reality was different than I'd understood. I thought David had $340,000 in his pension and savings. Modest but enough for a quiet retirement, for the travel we'd planned. What he actually had was $2. $3 million carefully moved through legitimate investments over 18 months, protected in accounts that Martin and his associates couldn't touch. Every dollar documented, every transfer legal, all of it triggered to become accessible to me only after his death. "He was paying me and 6 other people to protect you," James said. "Security consultants, lawyers, a private investigator. We've been watching your house for 4 months, Sarah. We've been watching Martin." The surveillance logs showed everything. Martin driving by the house at odd hours. Martin's business partner photographing our property. Martin's lawyer requesting death certificates and insurance documents within days of the funeral. They'd been preparing their move, and David's team had been documenting their preparation. "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked. "Why let me stay in the house if you knew I was being watched?" "Because you had to appear normal," Patricia explained. "If you'd suddenly left, changed your routine, acted scared, they would have known David had told you something. They would have accelerated their plans. We needed them to think you were ignorant, harmless, not a threat. I was bait. You were protected bait. There's a difference." Patricia walked me through the legal mechanisms. David had created a structure so carefully planned that it made my head spin. Trusts and escrows and triggers that activated based on specific events. If Martin filed certain types of claims, automatic responses would deploy. If anyone tried to contest David's will, predetermined evidence would be released to predetermined authorities. My husband had turned himself into a legal landmine, and any attempt to take what was mine would detonate the entire thing. "He was brilliant," Patricia said with something like awe. "I've never seen anyone plan this comprehensively. He anticipated moves I wouldn't have thought of. Counter moves to counter moves. It's like he was playing chess 5 years into the future." I thought about David at his desk in the basement, working late nights I'd thought were just overtime. Working while he was dying, building this elaborate trap while his body slowly failed him. "He should have been resting," I said. "He should have been with me." "He was with you," Patricia said gently. "Every moment he spent on this was time spent with you. He just wasn't in the same room." Martin Patterson came to my door 4 days after the funeral with his wife Linda and their lawyer. I'd been home for 1 day, the security team invisible but present. James had shown me where the cameras were hidden, where the panic buttons were installed, how to signal for help if I needed it. The house I'd lived in for 20 years had been transformed into a fortress without me noticing. They arrived at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of time chosen to seem businesslike and reasonable. Martin wore a dark suit. Linda had on pearls. Their lawyer carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. They had papers showing that David had borrowed $890,000 from the Patterson family over the years. Investment capital for business ventures that never materialized. Personal loans to cover shortfalls. They had promissory notes with David's signature, dated and notarized. They wanted the house, the life insurance, everything. "David would want his family to be whole," Martin said, sitting in my living room with that sympathetic expression, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You understand, Sarah. This isn't personal. It's about honoring my brother's debts, about doing right by the family." I watched him perform this speech and realized I'd never really known him. 29 years of family dinners and holidays and birthday parties, and I'd never seen who he actually was. David had, though. David had seen him clearly. Linda nodded along. She'd always been better at the performance than Martin. She touched my hand, her skin soft and cool. "We know this is hard. We know you're grieving. But family has to come first." That's what David would have wanted. There it was. The knife slid between my ribs with a smile. That phrase. "You were never really a Patterson." Not when I'd nursed David's mother through her final illness, sitting by her bedside for 72 hours straight while she slowly forgot who we all were. Not when I'd shown up to every family birthday and holiday for 3 decades, bringing the potato salad nobody else would make, organizing the gift exchanges, remembering everyone's dietary restrictions. Not when I'd loved their brother with everything I had given him my life and my trust and my faith. I was never really family, which meant I was never really entitled to anything. Martin leaned forward. 29 years of marriage doesn't change blood, Sarah. You were his wife, but we're his family. We have to think about what's fair." The words landed like blows. I felt each one. But I'd been preparing for this moment without knowing it, building strength in muscles I didn't know I had. David had trusted me to be strong enough, had bet everything on it. I nodded and said I needed time to review the documents. My voice was steady. My hands didn't shake when I took their papers. I walked them to the door and watched them leave, Martin's expensive car pulling away from my curb, and I felt something break and rebuild inside my chest simultaneously. As soon as they were gone, I called Patricia. They came. "I know. We have it all on video. Audio too. Do you want to watch?" I did watch later that night, saw myself sitting on my couch, looking small and uncertain and grieving. saw Martin's performance, saw Linda's gentle manipulation, saw the lawyer's careful presentation of forged documents. But I also saw something I hadn't noticed in the moment. The way Martin's eyes had moved around the room, cataloging, assessing. The way he'd asked to use the bathroom, and Patricia showed me footage of him in there, opening the medicine cabinet, checking behind the mirror, looking for something. He was searching for David's evidence, Patricia said. He still doesn't know where it is. That's why they're trying the legal route first, but they'll escalate if this doesn't work. Then I started digging into what David had left me. The promissory notes were forgeries. Good ones, excellent ones actually, but forgeries nonetheless. David had never borrowed $1 from Martin. What David had done was discover that Martin was one of the shell company owners. Martin, who worked as a senior contracts manager at D&D, was funneling department money to himself and 11 other conspirators, including his wife Linda. The Patterson family lawsuit wasn't about money David owed. It was about getting control of David's evidence before I found it. Patricia showed me the proof. The real signatures versus the forged ones, analyzed by a handwriting expert David had hired. The timeline that proved David was out of the country when 2 of the loans were supposedly signed. The financial records showing the Patterson family had no liquidity to make these kinds of loans, that their own accounts were being fed by the fraud scheme. David had known this would happen. The documents included a file labeled Martin's War. My husband had spent the last year of his life fighting his own brother in secret, documenting every threat, every attempt at manipulation, preparing for the exact moment Martin would come for me. Inside that file were emails I wasn't supposed to see. Martin to David, 15 months ago. You need to be reasonable about this. Family protects family, but that goes both ways. Don't make me show Sarah who you really are. David's response. There's nothing you can tell Sarah that would turn her against me. But there's plenty I can tell the RCMP that would put you in prison. Think carefully about your next move. Martin again, 10 months ago. You're dying anyway. Why make this harder than it has to be? Let it go. Enjoy what time you have left. David. I'm dying, which means I have nothing to lose. You have everything to lose. Remember that. The correspondence painted a picture of 2 brothers at war, one protecting what he'd built, the other trying to take it. Martin had tried threats. He'd tried appeals to family loyalty. He'd tried bribery, offering David a cut if he'd just look the other way. Nothing worked. David was dying, and dying men are impossible to intimidate. But there was one email that made me stop breathing. Martin to David, 5 weeks before David's death. I know about the cancer. I know you're terminal. I also know Sarah doesn't know. Imagine if she found out you'd lied to her for over a year, kept something that huge from her. How would she feel about her perfect husband then? Let this go, David. Take the deal I'm offering. Or I tell Sarah everything, and you get to spend your last weeks watching her hate you. David's response was a single line. Tell her, I dare you. He'd called Martin's bluff, had been willing to risk our marriage, risk my hatred, rather than let Martin win. Because he knew, somehow he'd known, that I wouldn't hate him, that I would understand. Had he been right? I still wasn't sure. He loved you more than I've ever seen anyone love, James told me one night as we reviewed security footage. Every decision he made was about keeping you safe. Every sacrifice was for you. The network David built wasn't just those 7 people. It extended further. A journalist at the Ottawa Citizen who'd been given half the story and told to sit on it until conditions were met. A forensic accountant who'd been analyzing the shell companies for months. A retired judge who'd agreed to review the evidence and provide an opinion if needed. David had built redundancy into redundancy. If one piece failed, 3 others could compensate. Rachel explained how he'd brought her in. He called me to lunch 2 months before he died, said he needed to tell me something. I thought he was going to say he was sick, which technically he did. But then he spent 3 hours explaining this whole operation. He had charts, Mom. Actual flow charts showing who would do what and when. Were you angry he didn't tell me? I was furious. I yelled at him in the parking lot, asked him how he could lie to you like that, and he said... Rachel's voice broke. He said you were the strongest person he knew, but strength doesn't mean you have to carry everything. He said he could carry this for you. He could take this burden and let you just love him without the weight of knowing he was dying and fighting and preparing for war. I thought about that. About David coming home for dinner and asking about my day, listening to me complain about the book club drama or the leak in the basement, acting like our biggest problems were mundane and manageable, letting me live in that illusion of normalcy while he fought battles I couldn't see. Did he ever waver? I asked. Did he ever want to tell me? Rachel nodded. Once, about 3 weeks before he died. He was in pain, really bad pain, and he called me crying, said he couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep lying to you. I stayed on the phone with him for 2 hours, Mom. Just talking him through it, reminding him why he'd made this choice. And finally he said, Okay, I can hold on a little longer. For her, I can hold on. Was it a gift or a betrayal? I still don't know. Maybe it was both. The confrontation happened on a Thursday morning in a boardroom at the Ottawa Police Service headquarters on Elgin Street. Martin and Linda arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, precisely on time, led by their lawyer who looked confident in the way expensive lawyers do. They were expecting to meet with me and Patricia to finalize the estate settlement, to pressure me into accepting their terms, to walk away with everything. Instead, they found Rachel in her detective's shield, standing beside her sergeant. 2 officers from the RCMP's Sensitive and International Investigations Unit, both in suits that screamed federal authority. A representative from the Department of Justice, a woman named Sarah Chen who had the kind of face that gave nothing away. And Patricia, who smiled when they walked in. I watched Martin's face change when he understood. The color drained out so fast I thought he might actually faint. His skin went from pink to gray in the space of 3 seconds. Linda grabbed his arm, her knuckles white. "What is this?" Martin's lawyer said. "Mrs. Patterson? What's the meaning of—" "Sit down," Rachel said. Not loud, not aggressive, just a command that expected to be followed. They sat. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out the first folder. It was 3 inches thick, held together with metal clips, every page tabbed and labeled. She slid it across the polished conference table. "We have everything," Patricia said. "Every transaction, every email, every meeting. Your brother spent 14 months building a case that could survive his death and convict every single person involved in this fraud." Martin stared at the folder like it was a snake. "That's not— You can't— We can," the Department of Justice representative said. "We have. Your brother was remarkably thorough. He documented the entire conspiracy, from inception to present day. The evidence includes your personal communications, your financial records, your travel to meet with co-conspirators. There are 17 separate criminal charges we're prepared to file." The lawyer reached for the folder, flipped it open. I watched his face change as he scanned the first few pages, watched him understand that this wasn't a bluff or a negotiating tactic. This was real. "This is—" He started, then stopped. Flipped another page, then another. "Where did you get this?" "David Patterson compiled it over 14 months, Patricia said. "While he was dying of cancer that none of you knew about. While he was preparing for exactly this moment, he knew Martin would come after his widow. He prepared accordingly." Linda made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. "This is insane. David was sick. He was paranoid. Whatever he thought he found." "He found $47 million in fraudulent contracts," Rachel said. "He found shell companies registered in your name, Linda. He found bank transfers to your personal accounts. He found emails where you and Martin discussed how to distribute the money." I watched Linda's performance crack. Watched her realize that the sympathetic grieving sister-in-law routine wasn't going to work here. She looked at Martin, and I saw something pass between them. Not love, not even partnership, just the recognition that they'd been caught. The RCMP officer, a man named Detective Harrow, pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Martin's voice came through the speaker, crystal clear. "We need to accelerate the timeline. David's getting suspicious. If he goes to the IG before we can neutralize the paper trail, we're all fucked." Another voice, Linda's. "Can't we just offer him a cut? He's dying anyway. Make his last months comfortable." Martin again. "He won't take it. I know my brother. He's too fucking self-righteous. We need to be ready to move against him if necessary." There was a pause in the recording. Then Linda again. "Define move against him. Whatever it takes. If he threatens to go public, we make sure he's not credible. Find his weaknesses. His wife, his daughter. Something that makes him back down." The recording ended. Martin looked at his lawyer, who had gone very pale. "That's inadmissible," the lawyer said, but his voice had no conviction. "You can't record someone without—" "It was recorded in Martin's office," Patricia said. "David installed the device during a family dinner. Technically, it's Martin's property, recorded on Martin's premises. Perfectly admissible. But we have 17 other recordings that are equally damning, obtained through various legal means. We also have your client's forged promissory notes, which constitute fraud. We have attempted theft of estate assets. We have conspiracy to obstruct justice." She pulled out another folder, then another, each one landing on the table with a heavy thump that seemed to make Martin flinch. The complete victory mechanism was extraordinary in its precision. David had structured everything so that if I made it to this moment, if I found the safety deposit box, if I activated the emergency protocols, if I trusted the people he'd chosen, the legal machinery would engage automatically. The evidence went to 5 different agencies simultaneously: RCMP, Department of Justice, Canada Revenue Agency, Public Prosecution Service, and the House of Commons Ethics Commissioner. Every copy time-stamped and certified, every document admissible in court. The system was designed so completely that my only job was to survive long enough to trigger it. Detective Harrow set down a stack of photographs. "These were taken over the last 6 months. You meeting with your co-conspirators, exchanging documents, making payments. We have surveillance logs that corroborate every transaction in David's financial records." Martin tried to speak. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Martin shook him off with a violent gesture that made the lawyer pull back. "David was my brother," he said, and his voice was thick with something that might have been rage or grief or both. "My brother. How could he do this to me? How could he turn against his own family?" The room was silent. Everyone waited to see if I would answer. I stood up slowly, walked to where Martin sat, and looked down at him. He couldn't meet my eyes. "How could he what?" I asked. My voice was steady, calm. I'd found that calm somewhere around 4 a.m. on the morning I'd run through Mrs. Kowalski's backyard, and it hadn't left me since. How could he protect his wife from his corrupt brother? How could he choose his actual family over his blood relatives who were trying to destroy him? How could he spend his dying months making sure the people he loved were safe from people like you? Martin looked at me with something like hatred, raw and undisguised. "You turned him against us. You were never really a Patterson. You were always—" "Stop," Rachel said. She stood up and I saw my daughter in her professional mode, the one that made suspects confess and witnesses remember. "You don't get to talk to my mother. You don't get to rewrite history. My father loved his brother until his brother became a criminal. Then he loved his wife more. That's not betrayal. That's basic human decency." Linda was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. It started small. Just a few contracts. Just some extra money. We were going to stop." "You were going to stop when you had $47 million, Detective Harrow said. That's very public-spirited of you. The arrests happened over the next 6 days. 12 people, including 2 deputy ministers who'd been in their positions for over a decade, 4 senior managers who'd helped facilitate the scheme, Martin and Linda Patterson, who'd been instrumental in setting up the shell companies and moving the money. The estimated fraud totaled $47 million over 6 years, money that was supposed to go to infrastructure improvements, base maintenance, equipment upgrades. Instead, it had gone to vacation homes and luxury cars and private school tuition. The news coverage was extensive. Every major outlet covered it. The CBC ran a special investigation. The Ottawa Citizen did a multi-part series. David's role was explained carefully. The analyst who'd discovered the fraud, built the case, prepared for the eventuality of his own death to ensure justice would be served. They called him a hero. They called him selfless. They called him brilliant. They didn't know about the videos he'd recorded for me, the scheduled messages that still arrived on my phone, the detailed instructions for how to manage the house, the finances, the life he'd left behind. They didn't know how he'd spent his final months, not making peace with death, but preparing for war. The investigation David had started would eventually lead to 34 additional arrests and the complete restructuring of D&D's procurement oversight. Parliamentary committees would hold hearings. The Auditor General would issue a scathing report. People would lose jobs and pensions and reputations. But Martin's arrest was the one I watched in person. The RCMP came to his house in Rockcliffe Park at 6 a.m. on a Monday. I wasn't supposed to be there, but James drove me, parked down the street where I could see. Martin came out in handcuffs, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair uncombed. Neighbors watched from windows. Someone took a photo that would end up in the newspaper. He looked small, diminished. Nothing like the confident man who'd sat in my living room and told me I was never really family. The twist came during Martin's bail hearing 3 days later. His lawyer, a different one now, someone who specialized in criminal defense, presented documentation showing that Martin Patterson wasn't actually David's biological brother. The man I'd known as Martin had been adopted at age 3, something even David apparently hadn't known, until his investigation uncovered the sealed records while digging into Martin's background. The Patterson family had never told either of them. Martin had grown up believing he had a blood claim to Patterson family legacy, had justified his corruption partly through that sense of entitlement, had tried to take everything from me based on family ties that were legally no different than mine, through marriage. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Martin had spent his entire life believing he was the real Patterson, the one with the actual family claim, had looked down on me as the outsider who'd married in, and the whole time, he was adopted. No more blood connection to the Patterson name than I had. I found out later that David had discovered this truth 7 months before he died. Patricia showed me his notes, handwritten in the margin of an adoption record. Martin doesn't know. Mom and Dad never told him. Should I? Would it matter? Would it change anything? He'd decided not to tell, had taken that secret to his grave. I don't know if it was mercy or strategy, maybe both. The bail hearing was held in a packed courtroom. I sat in the back row, wearing sunglasses even though we were indoors. The Crown argued that Martin was a flight risk, that he had the resources to disappear, that the severity of the charges demanded he be held. The defense argued that Martin was a respected civil servant with deep community ties, that his family needed him, that he deserved the presumption of innocence. The judge looked at the evidence summary, looked at Martin, and denied bail. As the guards led him away, Martin's eyes found me in the back row. I took off my sunglasses. I wanted him to see my face clearly, wanted him to see that I wasn't crying, wasn't devastated, wasn't broken. You were never really a Patterson, I said, not loud, just loud enough for him to hear. The reporters caught it anyway. Someone had a phone recording. It made the Ottawa Citizen the next morning, the headline reading, "Widow's Quiet Justice. Fraud Suspect's Adopted Status Revealed." The comment section filled with people debating whether I'd been cruel or justified. I didn't read it. Didn't care. I'd said what I needed to say. My understanding of David transformed in the months that followed. I'd thought I was married to a cautious man who avoided conflict, who kept his head down and did his job, who came home at 5:30 and helped with dinner and watched hockey on weekends. I was actually married to someone brave enough to fight corruption while dying, strategic enough to build a case that would outlive him, and loving enough to protect me from dangers I never knew existed. I found more videos on the USB drive from the safety deposit box, 23 of them, recorded over the last 4 months of his life. In some, he looked relatively healthy. In others, the sickness was visible, his face gaunt, his movements slow. In one recorded 3 weeks before his death, he talked about our first date, how nervous he'd been, how I'd worn a blue dress and laughed at his terrible jokes. "I knew that night I was going to marry you," he said to the camera. "I knew you were the person I wanted to spend my life with. I got 30 years, Sarah. 30 beautiful years, and I'm grateful for every single day. I'm sorry I can't give you more, but I can give you this. I can give you safety. I can give you justice. I can make sure the people who tried to hurt you fail completely." He cried in that video. I'd never seen him cry before that, and watching it broke something in me that I didn't know could still break. I sat on the floor of his office and sobbed until I had nothing left. But I also felt something else. Pride. Gratitude. The bone-deep knowledge that I had been loved in a way most people never experience. David had spent his last months in service to my future. Had fought when he should have been resting. Had built instead of surrendering. That's love. Not the easy kind. Not the comfortable kind. The fierce, ruthless, uncompromising kind that would burn itself out completely to keep someone else warm. I understood myself differently, too. For 29 years, I'd thought of myself as David's wife, Rachel's mother, the woman who kept the household running while others did important work. I'd taught elementary school until Rachel was born, then stayed home, then worked part-time at the library. Small contributions, nothing that would change the world. But David had trusted me to be strong enough for this, had built his entire strategy around the belief that if he prepared the path carefully enough, I would have the courage to walk it. He'd known I could survive the 3 a.m. message, the discovery, the confrontation. He'd bet everything on my strength, and I'd proven him right. That knowledge changed how I saw my own history. All those years of quiet support weren't weakness. They were foundation. I'd built the stable home that allowed David to take risks at work. I'd raised Rachel to be the kind of person who could carry secrets and honor them. I'd created the life worth protecting. I wasn't the supporting character in my own story. I was the reason the story mattered. The trial took 14 months to reach its conclusion. Martin pleaded not guilty, fought every charge, tried to blame subordinates and claim ignorance, and argue that he'd been following orders. None of it worked. The evidence was too complete, too overwhelming, too damning. I attended every day of testimony, sat in the same seat in the gallery, took notes, watched the prosecutors systematically dismantle every defense. Rachel sat with me when she could. Patricia was in the courtroom as part of the civil proceedings, recovering assets for the government. Watching the trial unfold was like watching David's mind at work. Every piece of evidence he'd gathered had a purpose. Every document told part of the story. The prosecutors walked the jury through the fraud step by step, using David's meticulous records to build a narrative that was impossible to refute. The defense tried to argue that David had been paranoid, that his cancer had affected his judgment, that he'd built a conspiracy out of innocent business transactions. But the evidence was too solid. Bank records don't lie. Email headers don't lie. Recorded conversations, financial transfers, photographs of clandestine meetings. None of it lied. One of the prosecutors, a woman named Catherine Liu, approached me during a lunch recess 3 months into the trial. "Your husband was extraordinary," she said. "I've prosecuted fraud cases for 15 years, and I've never seen evidence this comprehensive. He did my job for me. All I have to do is present what he compiled. The verdict came back on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all 17 counts. Martin's face when the foreman spoke was blank, like he'd used up all his expressions and had nothing left. Linda collapsed. Their lawyer looked defeated. Sentencing happened 6 weeks later. The judge, a woman named Justice Morrison who'd been on the bench for 20 years, spoke for 12 minutes about the breach of public trust, about the damage to institutions, about the arrogance of believing you're above the law. "You stole from your country," she said to Martin. "You stole from the people you were supposed to serve. You betrayed your colleagues, your department, and your family. And when your brother tried to stop you, you attempted to destroy his widow out of spite and greed. These crimes are made worse by the position of trust you held." Martin was serving 11 years in federal prison. Linda got 8. The others received sentences ranging from 3 to 13 years. The deputy ministers fell hardest. One got 15 years, the other 13. Their pensions were revoked. Their names became synonyms for corruption. I visit Rachel for dinner every Sunday now. She cooks, which is still a strange reversal. I raised her on casseroles and roasts, simple comfort food that got dinner on the table while juggling a toddler and part-time work. She learned to make Thai curry and homemade pasta somewhere along the way, skills she picked up in cooking classes I didn't even know she was taking. Every Sunday, her apartment smells like lemongrass or fresh basil, and I sit at her kitchen counter watching her move through the space with the same focused efficiency she brings to police work. The first few dinners after the trial were awkward. We'd sit across from each other, pushing food around our plates, not knowing what was safe to talk about. David was everywhere and nowhere. His absence was the third person at the table, the ghost neither of us knew how to address. But eventually, we found our rhythm. We talk about her cases now, the ones she can discuss. She tells me about the rookie detective she's mentoring, about the domestic violence investigation that finally resulted in an arrest, about the politics of the police service that frustrate her. And we talk about her father. Not the dying man who'd built a conspiracy case while his body failed. Not the strategic mastermind who'd orchestrated protection from beyond the grave. Just David. The dad who taught her to ride a bike and couldn't watch scary movies because he'd get nightmares. The man who sang off-key in the shower and always burned the toast. The husband and father who'd been ours before he became a hero to everyone else. "Do you think he was right not to tell you?" she asked me once, 6 months after the trial. We were sitting on her balcony, the Ottawa skyline spread out before us in the summer dusk. She was on her second glass of wine. I was nursing my first. I thought about it, really thought. Watched the lights coming on in apartment windows across the city, each one representing a life, a story, choices made and unmade. "I don't know," I said finally. "Part of me wishes I'd known, wishes I could have been there for him while he was sick. I could have held his hand through the pain, made sure he wasn't alone when the fear got too big. But another part understands why he did it. He gave me 14 normal months, 14 months where I didn't have to watch him die, where we could just be us, where I could complain about him leaving his socks on the floor and he could laugh at my terrible garden puns, ordinary things, precious things. He loved you so much, Mom." Rachel's voice was thick. When he brought me into this, when he explained everything, he cried. I'd never seen him cry like that. He said choosing not to tell you was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than accepting the diagnosis. Harder than building the case. He said every morning he woke up next to you and had to pretend everything was fine was both a gift and a torture. I know. I just wish I'd been able to show him I was strong enough to handle it. That he didn't have to carry it alone. You did show him. You're showing him every day. Mom, you survived everything he knew was coming. You trusted his network. You activated the protocols. You faced Martin in that courtroom and didn't break. You're living the life he fought to give you. That's exactly what he needed to know you could do. We sat in silence for a while, watching the city breathe, watching people move behind lit windows, each of them with their own secrets, their own burdens, their own complicated love stories. Sometimes, late at night, my phone lights up with old messages David scheduled to send months or years after his death. Little reminders. Check the furnace filter. Rachel's birthday is next week. She likes chocolate cake, not vanilla. The roses need to be pruned in November, not October. Evidence that he'd thought about my future in granular detail, had tried to make it easier in whatever small ways he could. Last month I got one that said, "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I always knew you were stronger than you believed. I'm sorry I couldn't stay to see everything you'd become. But I see it anyway. I see you." I cried for an hour. Then I printed it out and put it in the silver frame with our wedding photo, right where the safety deposit key used to be. The scholarship fund I established in David's name has given out 14 awards so far. Children of civil servants who expose fraud or corruption, who show moral courage in difficult situations. The first recipient was a 17-year-old whose father had reported a bribery scheme and lost his job as a result. Her family had struggled financially after he was blacklisted in his field. She'd worked 3 part-time jobs through high school to help make ends meet. I met her at the award ceremony last year. Her name was Aisha, and she had her father's eyes, determined, unflinching, a little sad around the edges. When I handed her the check, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. "My dad says what your husband did, exposing that corruption even though he knew he was dying, it gave him the courage to come forward. He says if Mr. Patterson could fight while dying, he could fight while living. Your husband saved more than just you, Mrs. Patterson. He saved my dad's faith in doing the right thing." I cried in the bathroom after that. Cried for David, for Aisha's father, for all the people who choose courage over comfort and pay the price for it. She's studying law now at Carleton, wants to work in public corruption cases. She emails me sometimes, updating me on her progress, sharing small victories. Last month, she told me she'd joined a legal clinic that helps whistleblowers navigate retaliation. "I'm going to be the lawyer my dad needed," she wrote. "The one Mr. Patterson would have wanted to exist. David would have liked that, would have liked knowing that his fight inspired others to fight. That courage can be contagious. That one man's refusal to look away could ripple outward in ways he'd never lived to see." The scholarship recipients meet once a year, all 14 of them now. They've formed their own network, supporting each other through school and career challenges. They call themselves Patterson's Army, which makes me laugh and cry simultaneously. An army my husband built after his death, soldiers in a war against corruption he started, but others will finish. One of them, a young man named Marcus whose mother exposed fraud in provincial healthcare contracts, is already working for the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. Another, a woman named Jennifer, just passed the bar and joined the same law firm that Patricia works for. They're carrying David's fight forward, each in their own way. Making him more than a case file, making him a movement. I still live in our house on Sunnyside Avenue, the one Martin tried to take, the one that's worth so much more than money now. It's the physical manifestation of David's love, his strategy, his refusal to let corruption win. I kept David's office exactly how he left it, including the camera he used to record those final messages. His coffee mug still sits on the desk, the one that says, "World's most boring job," that I gave him as a joke years ago. There's a photo of the 3 of us, David, Rachel, and me, taken at Rachel's Police Academy graduation. We're all smiling, proud, unaware that in 2 years he'd be fighting cancer and corruption simultaneously. Sometimes I go down there and sit in his chair and talk to him. It sounds crazy, I know. Rachel worried about it at first, suggested maybe I should see a therapist, process my grief in healthier ways. But this isn't unhealthy. It's communion. It's continuing a conversation that death interrupted but didn't end. I tell him about Rachel's promotion to sergeant last month, the ceremony where the chief called her one of the finest officers on the force, where she stood on that stage in her dress uniform, and I saw David in every line of her face. She has his determination, his sense of justice, his inability to walk away from what's right even when it's hard. The reception afterward was full of her colleagues, all of them telling me stories about her work, her dedication, her compassion. One detective, an older man with kind eyes, pulled me aside. "Your daughter saved my career," he said. "I was ready to quit. I'd seen too much corruption, too much looking the other way. And then I heard about what her father did, how he fought until his last breath to expose fraud. It reminded me why I became a cop. Your husband gave me my purpose back, Mrs. Patterson. Through Rachel, through his example." I tell David about the government's new anti-corruption task force that used his investigation as a template for their protocols. They call it the Patterson Standard, the level of documentation and evidence building that all major fraud investigations should aspire to. There's a plaque at D&D headquarters with his name on it now. In memory of David Patterson, whose courage and integrity set the standard for exposing corruption in public service. Martin's conviction was the first domino. The others are still falling. 3 more deputy ministers under investigation. 17 contractors banned from government work. $237 million in fraudulent contracts identified and stopped. The reforms David's case triggered are changing how procurement works across the entire federal government. I tell David about the book someone wants to write about his case. A journalist from the Ottawa Citizen, the same one he'd briefed months before his death, wants to tell the full story. She wants interviews with me, with Rachel, with the team David built. She wants to humanize him, show the man behind the case file. I haven't decided if I'll participate. Part of me wants the world to know who David really was, not just the strategic mastermind, but the man who sang off-key and burned toast and cried during sad movies. But another part wants to keep him mine, wants to protect the private moments, the marriage nobody else saw, the love that existed separate from the heroics. I tell him I finally understand why he loved me enough to spend his last months fighting instead of resting. Not because I was weak and needed protection, but because he knew I was strong enough to survive what was coming and wise enough to trust the path he'd built. "You saw me more clearly than I saw myself," I say to the empty office, to the ghost of my husband, to the love that outlasted death. "You knew I could do this. I wish I'd known it too. I wish we could have fought together. But I understand now. You were fighting with me the whole time. Just from a different position. Love isn't always soft and gentle. Sometimes it's a dying man documenting evidence at 2 a.m., recording videos he'll never see his wife watch, building weapons for battles he won't live to witness. Sometimes it's the hardest thing a person can do, leaving someone behind with everything they need to win without you. I was 52 years old when my husband died. Young enough to rebuild a life, old enough to finally understand what devotion actually means. David gave me that, along with justice, safety, and one last gift, the knowledge that I had been loved with a ferocity that transcended death itself. The house feels different now. Not empty exactly, but changed. The walls that used to feel like they were closing in after David died now feel protective, solid. I've started teaching part-time again, literacy classes at the community center. My students are mostly older adults, immigrants learning English, people who slipped through the education system, a few retirees who never learned to read well and are tired of hiding it. There's a woman in my Tuesday night class, Maria, who reminds me of myself a year ago. She's in her 60s, recently widowed, learning English so she can help her grandchildren with homework. She told me once, in halting sentences she's proud to construct, that her husband had taken care of all the paper things, bills, forms, official documents. Now she has to learn. I am stronger than I think, she said to me after class one night, proud of constructing a complete sentence. My daughter tells me this. You are, I agreed. But it's okay that you didn't know it before. Sometimes we don't discover our strength until we need it. She smiled. You also, yes? You also are stronger than you think. I am now, I said. Someone believed in my strength before I did. That made all the difference. I started a garden in the backyard too, something I'd always wanted but never made time for. David used to joke that I could kill a plastic plant. But this spring, I dug up a corner of the lawn and planted tomatoes, herbs, some flowers Rachel helped me choose. I watched them grow, tend them carefully, celebrate each tiny tomato that appears. It's a metaphor, I know. Too obvious to be subtle. But sometimes the obvious metaphors are the ones we need. I'm growing things. I'm nurturing life. I'm building something from soil and seeds and careful attention. The hiking group I joined does trails in Gatineau Park on Sunday afternoons, after my dinners with Rachel. 10 of us, all women, all over 50, all rebuilding lives after various kinds of loss. Divorce, widowhood, empty nests, career changes. We hike and talk and support each other in the way women do when they're not performing for anyone, when they're just being human together. One of them, a woman named Claire, lost her husband to suicide 3 years ago. She understands the complicated grief, the anger mixed with love, the guilt of not seeing signs you couldn't have seen. Do you ever stop being angry? I asked her once, as we climbed a particularly steep trail. No, she said. But you stop being only angry. You make room for other things too. Gratitude, peace, even joy. Eventually. The anger becomes one note in a chord instead of the only sound you can hear. I'm building a life that's mine, shaped by David's sacrifice but not defined by it. He gave me the freedom to do that, gave me the security and the resources and the justice that allows me to move forward instead of just surviving. But more than that, he gave me permission to discover who I am when I'm not just someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's target. I'm Sarah Patterson, and I'm 53 years old, and I'm learning who that person is separate from everyone else's needs and expectations. Last week I went to visit Martin in prison. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not Rachel, not Patricia, not any of David's network. Just filled out the visitor forms and showed up on a Tuesday morning when I knew Rachel would be at work. The drive to the federal penitentiary in Joyceville took 2 hours. 2 hours to think about what I was doing, why I was doing it, what I hoped to accomplish. I almost turned around 3 times, pulled into a gas station halfway there and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, arguing with myself. But something pulled me forward. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that, might never be ready. Not closure. That's a myth, a thing people say when they don't know what else to offer. Maybe it was just the need to see him reduced, to confirm that David's victory was complete. Or maybe, in some small part of myself I wasn't proud of, I wanted him to see me thriving. Wanted him to witness what his attempt to destroy had failed to accomplish. The prison was exactly what you'd expect. Gray concrete, barbed wire, the kind of institutional bleakness that makes you grateful for your freedom the moment you see it. Security was thorough. Metal detectors, bag searches, pat-downs. Everyone was polite but cold. Professional in the way that comes from doing the same routine 10,000 times. He looked older. Prison does that to people. Compresses years into months. Etches hardship into faces that used to look comfortable. His hair had gone mostly gray. He'd lost weight in an unhealthy way, his face hollow and his hands bony. The kind of weight loss that speaks to stress and bad nutrition and the grinding anxiety of incarceration. We sat across from each other with a scratched plexiglass barrier between us. I could see fingerprints on it, smudges from thousands of hands pressed against the barrier, reaching for connection they couldn't quite achieve. He picked up the phone on his side. I picked up mine. The plastic was worn smooth by use, warm from some previous conversation. "Why are you here?" he asked. No preamble, no greeting. His voice sounded different through the phone line, tinny, distorted, less powerful than I remembered. "I wanted to see you," I said. "I wanted to understand." Understand what? There was defensiveness in his tone, the kind that suggested he'd been asked this question before, by lawyers and psychologists, and maybe by himself in the long hours of the night. Why you did it. Why you chose this. You had a good job, a good life, a wife who loved you. Why did you need more? Martin laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just bitterness. The sound of a man who'd had 2 years to contemplate his choices and still couldn't make peace with them. You wouldn't understand. You and David, you were always satisfied with enough, content with being middle class and ordinary. Some of us wanted more. Some of us weren't willing to spend 40 years at the same desk, driving the same car, taking one vacation a year to the same cottage. Some of us had ambition. Ambition, I repeated. Is that what you call stealing $47 million from taxpayers? Ambition? His jaw tightened. Don't act superior. You benefited from David's money, too. The money he made, the lifestyle you lived. You think that was all from his government salary? Every dollar David made was legal. Every investment documented. Every tax paid. You know that. You saw the evidence. There's a difference between ambition and crime, Martin. David knew where that line was. You chose to cross it. And was it worth it? I asked, leaning closer to the plexiglass. The more? The vacation homes? The luxury cars? The private schools for kids you don't even have? Was it worth 11 years in here? Worth watching Linda go to prison? Worth destroying your family's name? He looked at me for a long moment. I saw something move behind his eyes. Regret, maybe, or just the calculation of a man trying to decide what story would work best. You know what the worst part is? He said finally. David was right, about everything. I could have gotten away with it if he hadn't been so fucking thorough. But he knew exactly how to build a case I couldn't beat. He knew me too well. Knew how I thought, how I operated. He anticipated every move I'd make and prepared counter moves I couldn't see coming. Even dying, even with cancer eating his brain, he was smarter than me. There was admiration in his voice, twisted, bitter admiration, but real nonetheless. He loved you, I said. That's why he knew you. He loved you his whole life, until you made it impossible. He studied you because you were his brother. He knew your patterns because he'd watched you for 50 years. He didn't want to destroy you, Martin. He wanted to stop you. There's a difference. He chose you over me. No, you chose crime over him. Don't rewrite history to make yourself the victim. David gave you chances. I saw the emails. He warned you, offered you a way out. You're the one who threatened his wife, who tried to steal from a dying man, who put greed over family. Don't put that on him. Martin slammed the phone down, stood up so fast his chair scraped backward with a harsh screech. The guard moved toward him, hand going to his belt. But Martin sat back down, slowly, deliberately. Picked up the phone again. His hand was shaking. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was different now, smaller. The performance dropped. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I threatened you. I'm sorry I tried to take your house. I'm sorry I forced David to spend his last months building a case against his own brother, instead of making peace with dying. I'm sorry for all of it. I watched his face. Tried to find sincerity in the lines around his eyes, in the set of his mouth. Was he sorry? Or was he sorry he'd been caught? I don't forgive you, I said. But I don't hate you either. I just feel sad that you became someone David couldn't recognize, that somewhere between the brother he grew up with and the man sitting in front of me now, you lost yourself. Or maybe you found yourself. I don't know which is worse. I left after that. The guard escorted me back through the security checkpoints, returning my belongings from the locker, guiding me toward the exit. The heavy doors clanged shut behind me with a finality that made me flinch. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, breathing in air that smelled like freedom, car exhaust and cut grass and summer heat rising off asphalt. It smelled beautiful. I drove home through afternoon traffic, the radio playing songs I didn't hear. My mind was full of Martin's face, the shake in his hands, the sorry that might have been real or might have been another performance. I'd probably never know which. Maybe it didn't matter. He was where he needed to be. Justice had been served, even if redemption remained uncertain. When I got home, I went down to David's office and pulled out the video files again. I'd watched most of them by now, but there was one I'd been saving. Found one I hadn't watched yet, labeled, "For Sarah, 5 years." It was set to send automatically in 2028, 3 years from now. But I needed to hear his voice today. Needed the reminder of why all of this mattered. I opened it anyway. David looked tired in this one. It was clearly recorded at the very end, maybe days before he died. He was in pajamas instead of his usual button-down shirt, sitting in bed instead of at his desk. The camera angle was slightly off, like he'd propped it up on something and didn't have the energy to adjust it properly. But his eyes were clear, alert, full of the love that had sustained me through everything. "Hi, sweetheart," he said. His voice was hoarse, a little slurred, the brain metastases affecting his speech. "If you're watching this, 5 years have passed. I hope they've been good years. I hope you've been happy. I hope you've built something new while keeping pieces of what we had." He paused, took a breath that seemed to cost him effort. "I've been thinking about all the things I want to tell you. All the advice, the warnings, the final words a dying man thinks he needs to impart. But none of that matters as much as this. You made my life worth living. Every single day with you was a gift." He talked for 10 minutes about memories, about our honeymoon in Quebec City, how it rained for 3 days straight, and we'd stayed in the hotel room reading books aloud to each other and ordering room service. About Rachel's first steps, how she'd wobbled toward him across the living room and fell into his arms laughing. About the time we got lost driving to Montreal and ended up having the best weekend of our marriage in some tiny town whose name we couldn't find again, staying in a bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple who fed us homemade pie and told us stories about 60 years of marriage. "That's what I want for you," David said. "Adventures, wrong turns that lead to right places. Pieces of life that don't make sense until you look back and see how they fit together. Don't spend 5 years mourning me, Sarah. Spend it living in ways that honor what we had by building what comes next." His eyes were wet now. One tear tracked down his too thin cheek. "I wish I could give you more time, more memories, more years of arguing about whose turn it is to take out the garbage and whether we really need another bookshelf. But I can give you this certainty. You made my life worth living. Every single day with you was a gift. And if I had to do it over, knowing how it would end, knowing I'd have to leave you, knowing I'd die too soon and hurt you in ways I can't fix, I'd choose you again. Every time. In every possible version of my life, I'd choose you." He leaned closer to the camera, close enough that I could see the individual hairs of his beard that he'd stopped trimming, the pallor of his skin, the exhaustion etched into every line. "You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to discover strengths you didn't know you had. You're going to build a life that's yours, not defined by being my wife or Rachel's mother, but shaped by who Sarah Patterson is when she gets to choose. And I'm so excited for you, even though I won't be there to see it. I'm so proud of who you'll become." The video ended. The screen went black. I sat in the dark of his office and felt the weight of that love. The responsibility and the honor of being loved like that. Loved so completely that even death couldn't diminish it. Loved with such foresight that he'd prepared messages for years I'd have to live without him, scheduled reminders that I was seen and known and cherished. I cried. Not the desperate, choking sobs of early grief, but the quiet tears of someone who's been given a gift too large to hold all at once. Someone who's learning to carry love that outlasted the lover, strength that was planted but took time to grow. Then I went upstairs, made myself dinner, the pasta recipe Rachel had taught me last week, and called her to tell her about her father's message. We talked for an hour, about the video, about my visit to Martin, about the small victories and large questions of building a life after loss. "I think Dad would be proud of you, Mom," Rachel said before we hung up, "of who you're becoming, of how you're not just surviving, but actually living." "I think he already was," I said. "I think that's what all of this was about. Him showing me I was worth fighting for. Worth building an empire to protect. Worth loving with everything he had." Life goes on. That's what David wanted. Not for me to freeze in grief, but to keep moving forward. To honor what we had by building something new. Sometimes grief and gratitude can exist in the same breath. Sometimes you can miss someone desperately and still feel lucky you got to love them. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes contain the greatest gifts. David taught me that. In his life and in his death. In every message and every video and every carefully planned protection. He taught me what it means to love someone enough to let them go, but not before giving them everything they need to fly. The greatest gift we can give each other isn't time. It's not even presence. It's preparation. It's building something that outlasts us. It's loving someone so completely that even death can't end the protection. David Patterson died at 51 years old. But he's not gone. He's in every system he built, every message he scheduled, every protection he put in place. He's in Rachel's courage and my strength and the 14 scholarship recipients learning to fight corruption. He's in the life I'm building, the garden I'm planting, the hikes I'm taking in Gatineau Park. He's in every moment I choose joy instead of fear, every time I trust the path he laid instead of doubting my ability to walk it. That's not death. That's transformation. And it's the most powerful kind of love there is. Research shows that the effects of childhood trauma can echo through generations, but so can resilience. When we witness someone we love face impossible odds and survive, something shifts in our understanding of what's possible. David didn't just protect me from Martin's corruption. He showed me what devotion looks like when everything else is stripped away. He demonstrated that love isn't passive. It's strategic, fierce, and unrelenting in its commitment to the beloved's safety and future. Studies on post-traumatic growth reveal that people who've survived betrayal by trusted loved ones often emerge with deeper wisdom about relationships, clearer boundaries, and stronger advocacy for justice. The question isn't whether betrayal changes us, it's whether we let that change make us brittle or make us brave. David's final gift wasn't just evidence and protection. It was the certainty that I was worth fighting for, even when he had nothing left to give but his last months and his strategic mind. That kind of love doesn't happen in grand gestures alone. It happens in the 1,000 small decisions to prioritize someone else's well-being over your own comfort, to plan for a future you won't see, to trust that the person you love will be strong enough to carry what you leave behind. If you found meaning in this story, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Subscribe if you haven't already, because you don't want to miss what's coming next. I've got a story about a woman who discovered her entire family had been lying to her for 30 years, and when the truth came out, nobody was prepared for what she'd become. Trust me, you need to see this one. It'll change how you think about forgiveness, revenge, and everything in between.